This is John Cola with OKRaw.com. Today I have another exciting episode for you. It's going to be one like no other, actually. What we're going to talk about is what's behind me right there. It's a huge tree. So let's go over the tree and I'll tell you more about it. All right, so today we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, nuts. And it reminds me of a song when I was, growing up. Let's talk about nuts, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that can be. No, I'm not talking about my nuts. I'm talking about these nuts. Hey, they kind of look like my nuts. But these guys are actually called walnuts, and these are actually still in the pod. So what we're going to talk about is actually I'm harvesting walnuts today, and we're going to talk about the walnuts, how they look when they're on the tree, how they look when they're ripe, and everything you want to know about walnuts and other nuts on a raw foods diet. So I guess the first thing is, let's go ahead and show you guys what these guys look like on the tree. We're here in October, and now is the time when the walnuts are ripening. How can you tell if the walnuts are ripe? Well, it's very simple. All you need to do is look down. If you look down on the ground, you're gonna just see the nuts, just in the shell, just like that. And what happens is when the tree is ready, because these walnuts actually grow in a little fruit here, and this fruit is actually non-edible, and this is the skin of the fruit, which is non-edible once again. And what happens is when it's ripe, it actually just cracks, and this nut literally just drops out of it. And then it's almost all ready to eat. This still has a very high moisture content. If you crack this open now, it'll be a little bit wet and maybe a tiny bit, bitter / astringent for you until they're completely dried out. Then you get that rich walnut flavor that we're all used to. So let me go ahead and peel this guy out. Oh, and there it is. And you can see here, the one we just picked out is actually quite still wet and moist. And here's one off the ground. So you can see once they fall on the ground, the sun kind of dries them naturally, and some of the water content is lost. Now, if you do harvest them right off the tree and they're still a bit moist, and you just put them in a sealed jar, not a good idea. They will mold on you. The best thing I like to do is actually just lay these out in the sun to sun dry them to get some of that moisture level off so that it will store for the winter and beyond. So the best way to harvest the nuts is, once again, look on the ground and look for ones that are out of the husk there. Here's one still in the husk, and once again, this one's a lot more moist. That being said, if the options are only one still in the husk, definitely pick them up. Don't walk away from any fallen nuts. I hate when your nuts fall or drop. Wait, that's something else. But anyways, these guys, whether it's already dry or not quite dry enough, it's still going to be good. Once again, you can lay them out in the sun, or if it's not sunny out, put them in a dehydrator at a low temperature just to evaporate off some of the moisture. Some people online and in books have written books that say, hey, depending on what the fruit or nut or food looks like, that's the part of the body it affects. So if we open up this walnut here, as you can see, it kind of looks like a little brain, and actually this is the brain stem right there. So they say walnuts are good for your brain. Now, I don't know about the other foods, if they look corresponding to the body. That may be some truth to that, but that may be a hasty generalization. But definitely with the walnuts, I believe it's true for one simple reason. Walnuts are one of the nuts that's actually highest in omega-3 fatty acids, and our brains are made up mostly of fat. And we need omega-3 fatty acids, which is an essential fatty acid, which means we can't create it. And if you're not eating a diet that's rich in omega-3 fatty acids, then, and you have a proper balance of omega-3 to 6s and the other essential fats, you're not going to create the DHA and the EPA that are important for brain health. So for this reason, I like walnuts a lot because they do contain omega-3s. Other seeds that contain omega-3s in high amounts are things like flax seeds, hemp seeds, and chia seeds. So definitely eat your walnuts and feed your brain. Man, that's one of the best walnuts I've had all year. One of the principles that I like to teach you guys is actually good, better, best, So in my opinion, it's always best to harvest your own fresh nuts from a tree, or better yet, even grow your own tree in high quality compost and rock dust to feed the tree everything it needs to make the most highest quality and best tasting nuts. In this case, we got some trees that are not being harvested, so I'm jumping right in and harvesting some nuts today. And besides actually harvesting your own, the next best is probably to buy them from a farmer's market and a local grower. So actually at the farmer's market this morning, these nuts in the shell were about $5 a pound. Maybe not exactly these nuts, but other walnuts in the shell were about $5 a pound. The shell may account for about 50% of the weight, so basically double the price, and that's how much it is for unshelled nuts. That being said, it's always best to purchase your nuts in the shell, because the shell is nature's packaging to keep the nut fresh so that it can later germinate into a nice huge tree. So always best to buy in-shell nuts for the best and long-term storage so the nuts don't go rancid or go bad for you. That being said, in this modern day and age, people don't like shelling nuts, and they just like to be able to like open the bulk bin and have a ton of nuts come out in it. And harvesting the walnuts today, it takes a lot of time to harvest the walnuts and then crack them open to get the actual amount of nuts you would end up eating if you didn't buy them in the bulk bin. So that's another reason why to purchase them in the shell. If you purchase in the shell, you're only going to crack open as many as you want to eat at one time, or as many as you need for a recipe. Let's next talk about how much nuts should you eat. There's many raw food recipe books out there, and many of them use nuts as a primary ingredient in many of the different recipes. There's nut-based pâtés, nut-based nut burgers, and nut-based lasagnas, and most raw food recipe books unfortunately have a high fat content because of the nuts, and even worse, the extracted oils. Extracted oils like walnut oil is 100% fat from the walnut. At least if you're eating the nut, you're getting the fat, the fiber, and all the other nutrients that are in the nut, not just the fat. For example, 1 tablespoon of oil, whether walnut oil, almond oil, avocado oil, olive oil, it's all 120 calories per tablespoon. So that's very calorically dense and with not a lot of nutrition. So I consider oils actually a junk food. So if you still want to eat junk food, eat your oils and be happy about it, but know that you're eating a junk food. What I recommend is a little bit different. I recommend a diet that is rich in fresh fruits and fresh vegetables as the majority of your diet, and I recommend about a handful or maximum 2 handfuls of nuts or seeds a day. And that's shelled nuts, of course. So in this way, you're eating some nuts because there are definitely valuable nutrients in the nuts. And the other thing I recommend is that you want to vary the kind of nuts you eat. So if you're eating macadamia nuts today, eat walnuts tomorrow, eat Brazil nuts the following day, pecans the next day, jungle peanuts the next day, and all different kinds of nuts, and always mix it up. Maybe even coconuts one day. Actually, last night I had a delicious coconut, macadamia nut, strawberry, bell pepper dressing. That was good. But anyways, overall, I recommend 1 or 2 handfuls of nuts at the max so that you don't jack up your fat calories, because fat calories, while they are coming from raw nuts or raw sources, still may not necessarily be the best thing for you. Another thing many raw foodists may not realize about nuts is that you think if you go to the bulk section, you buy some bulk nuts, they're always raw. Well, that's definitely not always the case. So the easiest thing is the raw cashews that are labeled raw in the stores and the bulk bins. They're definitely not raw. They have to be heat treated because the cashew nuts, or actually the cashew seeds from the fruit itself, can be toxic to actually get out. If you're trying to peel the nut, like if this was a cashew or trying to peel the shell off, it would burn and be caustic to your fingers and start to burn. So naturally wouldn't eat that. And obviously if it's burning your fingers, you put it in your mouth, it's gonna burn the shit out of your mouth. So you don't want to do it. So they need to use some heat to basically remove the toxins from that. They do have special techniques to use, gloves and machinery to get the nuts out to have truly raw cashews, but those are very expensive and they can be hard to find. Even so, if I have those cashews, they don't generally sit well or digest well for me in any case, so I don't think they're a really valuable nut. Another nut that is not raw, that is often found in your bulk bins at your health food store, and even labeled raw almonds that are from California, by law have to be steamed, sterilized, or worse, chemically pasteurized to kill all the pathogens and E. coli and things that are suspect on it. So, they have been heat processed or chemically processed, so technically they're not raw either. Other nuts may be heat treated or not, but you never know. It depends on how the processor is processing their nuts. That's yet another reason to harvest your own nuts or buy them direct from a farmer who's going to be honest with you and, ask them, how do you guys process your nuts? Do you sun dry them? Do you heat them up? Do you tunnel dry them? And find out if they're really raw or not, if that's really important to you, like it is for me. Of course, you don't want to be too anal about it, because sometimes you might they're not raw, I'm not going to eat it, and you could get orthorexic on me, and I don't want you getting orthorexic on me. Orthorexic is when you're too concerned about eating pure food, Most of the time, I like to harvest my nuts, and that's the best way to do it, or get nuts directly from the farmer. And in some cases, I'll buy some nuts from the store, and I'm not going to sweat it. But just know that they might not be truly raw. The next thing I want to talk about is, John, should I soak my nuts? Well, I personally don't like soaking my nuts. And I don't know about you, you could maybe soak yours if you want. But I think, but seriously, they say soaking your nuts may be important to reduce the enzyme inhibitors and start breaking them down and start the sprouting process, which will basically start the nut to germinate and grow. Now, things like almonds will, if they're raw, will definitely sprout, grow a tail, and actually start growing a tree for you. Other nuts like walnuts, especially if they've been broken up and they're out of the shell, they're not going to necessarily sprout, but they may reduce the enzyme inhibitors. Once you soak them, you create a different texture. So if that's the texture you want, that's great. If it's not, then you could then dehydrate your nuts and then eat them that way. And yes, I would agree that's probably the optimal way to do it. For me personally, I don't want to take time to soak my nuts, dehydrate them, and then have them ready. Too much of a pain in the butt. Because I'm eating such a low volume of nuts anyways, I personally don't feel it's a big issue. Although some people that have to food combine and have sensitive digestive systems, it may be very imperative to actually soak your nuts. But at this time, it's just too much of a pain in the butt for me, so I don't do it. But that being said, if you're eating a diet rich in nuts, like a lot of nuts, then I'd probably highly encourage you guys to do that. I tend to eat a diet very high in fruits and vegetables and actually very low in nuts. Yet another reason why I don't like soaking my nuts. I know you might be thinking, John, if I'm buying my nuts in the shell, how the heck do I get them open? Well, they have different kinds of nut crackers available. I like a nut cracker called the Crack-A-Nut, but they have many different kinds, and I own probably about a half dozen different nut crackers. I like to collect nut crackers. But one of the best nut crackers actually is your foot. You could actually just step on these nuts. Another thing I like to do is actually just crack it with my hands. So if you're strong enough, you can actually put these two between the palms of your hands, which is like this area right here, and take your hands like this and squeeze. And check it out. I've cracked it open with the bare hands, man. So yeah, you can definitely get your nuts open like that if you're a girl and don't have strong hands. Do the easier way, you could take a nut, find two rocks, man. Take a rock, take another rock. You want two flat surfaces and just crack it. Just crack it a little bit. Don't crack it real hard. It'll make it into a million pieces. You just want it enough to crack it open a little bit. And then you could just go ahead and peel off the shell there. And have your nut just like that. Nothing better than fresh nuts. So it took me a little while, but you can see I harvested a whole bunch of nuts. I mean, this Whole Foods bag, definitely a good reason to keep a Whole Foods bag or a grocery store bag in your car. This thing must be like 25, 30 pounds of in-shell nuts. That'll reduce about half, once they're dried and we shell them. But this will probably give me enough nuts to store through the winter and eat all winter long. And just call me a chipmunk. I think the last thing we're gonna do is go over by the tree and actually share with you guys how to store your nuts, because that storing your nuts is very important. Now I'm sitting next to the base of this giant walnut tree, and this is just a standard English walnut tree. They also have black walnuts, which have really hard shells and more of a medicinal nut. The other thing I want to remind you guys about is if you do harvest the nuts, still in the husk there, and you get them out, it has some funny coloring. Some of the coloring on here may stain pretty bad, so be aware of that. The other thing is when you're harvesting these, you don't necessarily want to put them in plastic bags. The plastic bags will retain the moisture and cause the excess mold. It's far better to put them in a cardboard or even wooden box. I guess about the last thing I want to mention about today is how to store your nuts, because that's a very important subject, how to store your nuts. I like to store my nuts fresh and let them hang. And I don't know about you guys, but seriously, to store your nuts, I think, if they're just dried and in the shell, I like to just store them in a cool, dry place. If you're super paranoid, you can put them in the refrigerator, but I don't like the moisture that the refrigerator can add. Some people that I know even, freeze their nuts. I don't like frozen nuts, but you can do that as well. I prefer to just, get as many nuts as I'm gonna use for that season, use them in that season, keep them in a cool, dry place like a cupboard, and then just use them and then get more nuts later. So don't stockpile nuts for 5 years. You always wanna turn over the nuts and actually all the foods you're eating. You want to eat the freshest and highest quality foods whenever possible. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode today, learning about walnuts and nuts on the raw foods diet. Once again, my name is John Kohler with OKRaw.com. We'll see you next time, and remember, keep eating your fresh fruits and vegetables. They're the best.